The year is 1957. Elvis Presley, Pat Boone, and Ricky Nelson are topping the charts, and the British invasion is still just a dream for bands like the Beatles. Hula hoops are invented, and Jack Kerouac's Ode to the Beat Generation on the Road is published. Garage rock bands are popping up all over the country. In Michigan, the kids are cruising Woodward Avenue in Detroit and cruising the circuit in Grand Rapids. DJs at WGRD tell listeners thanks for the ride. And for a group of young men just starting a band, the ride is only beginning.
There's a place where men will go, find a girl, love him so. Down the lonely road to the wishing well. Through a nickel I heard a splash. There before me there was a flash. There she was, the little girl of my dreams. This is the way I never thought. We have seen you reach along. I was startled. What a surprise. A miracle happened before my eyes. Just as sudden as she appeared before my eyes, she disappeared. Girl of my dreams, oh, I was startled. What a surprise, a miracle happened before my eyes. When I got home, I was floored from the people who moved next door. There she was, a little girl at wishing well. Yeah, that girl of my dreams. Yeah, girl I adore. Yeah, she moved right next door. Yeah. Yeah.
In 1958, the band found its identity. Gil King's father held a contest where the employees of his drafting firm could come up with a name. The boys voted on the names and went with the Kingtones. They dropped their horn section. The band joined the legions of young male groups in matching suits and played free for anyone who would have them, doing covers of popular songs like Rock Around the Clock and Rebel Rouser.
I guess like all kids our age, we were impressed by what was on the top 40 on the radio. Elvis was out, Bill Haley and the Comets were out, and we really loved their music. And we'd seen a local group around town by the name of Bob and the Bandits, and they always impressed us, and we thought, geez, wouldn't it be so neat if we had a band of our own? So we decided, well, what the heck, why don't we just put one together and try it? And so it's just a group of junior high kids getting together and starting off with basically a horn section. We didn't have guitars at first, but we were going to try anything. But it was fun.
Well, I can only tell you from my perspective, and that is that we practiced in a garage quite a lot. And I do recall that just recently, one of the kids who used to live on the street where we practiced came up to me and informed me that that we were kind of like the wild, crazy guys that nobody's parents wanted their kids to come down there because they were afraid we might corrupt them or something.
They were playing in our garage, and they seemed to attract all the kids in the neighborhood, and all of a sudden they'd start playing and the music was so loud, it was like ringing a bell, you know. I mean, all of a sudden all these people around our house, and I realized that music was an avenue to pursue because it attracted people, and when you're young, you want attention. So it was kind of a neat deal. People to this day tell us that they remember seeing us in the band practicing. I was watching, of course, but my brother and the other guys were playing. And they remember us. And they say that we were their heroes because they didn't know how to play guitar, but they wanted to learn how to play guitar. So it was kind of a new awakening for a 9 or 10-year-old guy like I was.
The band was now at the top of the garage band scene and building relationships with fans, club owners, and other bands. The music scene in Grand Rapids was a close-knit one, and the Kingtones fit right in.
In Grand Rapids, there was several garage bands, but the biggest of the garage bands really was the Kingtones. And the Kingtones was the leader. The Kingtones go all the way back to 1957 and started the garage band rock in Grand Rapids, and others followed after that. The Kingtones was a West Side group formed by Gil King, and later on formed by others in the group, and had mega hits, hits that were popular across the country. And we played them on the radio. There were top 40 stations across the country that played the Kingtones, Twins, and the others. And they were very, very popular across the country, but particularly popular in Grand Rapids.
The great thing about it was, back in those days, you were a traveling road band, you played clubs, and all the clubs at that time had live music, which you just don't find these days. And as I mentioned, you know, you go to a town and play 2 weeks at a specific club, and it was a lot of fun because you'd run into other bands that were on the road at the same time that you knew. So it was kind of buddy-buddy old home week, you know, so a lot of fun.
What the kids would do was, there was a place down in Otsego where they pressed records, and you could go down there and you could get an order of about 500 records, about the minimum you could get done. They would bring them back and have them in their garage, and they would bring them around to the different stores, and we'd sell them out for them. And of course we had a lot of the artists that would come to town that would be traveling around, you know, doing dances and concerts and things like that. And mostly it was in a dance vein. The artists would come in, and we would sell tickets for them, and gee, they cost a whole of $1 a piece, you know, to go see the current top 40 star, you know, singing and appearing at the dance. And the local records, usually if they sold out that original 500 that they had to order, they were so darn happy to get rid of them that they were, you know, ready to call it quits.
The Kingtones' next break came in 1961 when they recorded Wish for an Angel in the basement of friend and mentor Doc Jorn. The single featured lead singer Pete Mervine and was released on Jorn's own label, Musitone. The song went to #1 on WMAX's local top 40 charts in West Michigan, and the record was almost released nationally.
The Kingtones music, in my opinion, started on WMAX, which is a local radio station in Grand Rapids. It was a daytimer, and it had a disc jockey by the name of Lee Lyons. And he had a show called The Lion's Den. A lot of these disc jockeys had to have gimmicks back in those days. And it was top 40 radio. And Lee wound up favoring the Kingtones, and consequently, I think, really showed the Kingtones off. So the Kingtones were on WMAX. We as kids, we were all 12, 13, 14 years of age. We listened to the Kingtones, we listened to Lee Lyons. Lee Lyons wound up having dances at the high schools, and consequently, the Kingtones might have come to those dances. So we had these record hops where we could get out and dance to the music, dance to the live Kingtones, and really get to know the Kingtones, because they were the local group. They were the Grand Rapids people. They were the people who we could go up to and say, yeah, I know you, or I know your relative, or whatever. You felt real close to the Kingtones. But I have to say, Lee Lyons at WMAX was the person who really brought the Kingtones to light in Grand Rapids, and wound up introducing all of us kids to local garage rock and that sort of thing.
Phil and I grew up in a really strict church, and rock and roll was taboo, dancing was taboo, going to movies was no, it's all, playing cards is all the devil's work, etc., etc. It's just, the more that we were told not to do it, the more we wanted to. And we knew we had something because why were the people coming around? I mean, it's so elementary, an idiot could figure it out. And I thought, geez, if my brother, looking the way he does, is attracting women, I'm a shoo-in, you know. So I thought, maybe I better learn how to play the guitar too. So, but I saw the attraction. Rock and roll just came out, Elvis Presley just came out, and you could see that there was some kind of magic there.
Wish for an Angel and other Kingtones originals were not only performed by the group, but written by them as well. Singer Pete Mervine soon emerged as the Kingtones frontman, helping to pen the lyrics that he sang.
Wherever Pete Mervine went, the girls all followed. They had to have his autographs. They had to run up to him. You know, he was the pre-Beatles. He was before the Beatles came, and so he was the young girls' sex symbol. He was the young girls' way of saying, boy, if I ever wanted to date somebody someday, why couldn't it be Pete Mervine? Why couldn't it be somebody like Pete Mervine? But if you think about it, Pete Mervine was just a local fella. The last name Mervine was very well known in the community because there was other businesses that had Mervine in it. And so a lot of the kids knew, you know, that he was just local. So he was easy to touch, easy for the girls to get to, easy for the girls to communicate with, easy for the girls to swoon over. Once the Beatles took over in '64 and '65, the Beatles were way over there in England. The Beatles were on these magazines. Those Beatles were untouchable. Yeah, they looked great. Yeah, Ringo and Paul and John and all of that sort of thing. But Pete was here in town. Pete was somebody who, yeah, I could run into on the street. Maybe I'll see Pete down on the circuit. Maybe Pete will be driving in his car. It gives the girl a different feeling. It gives everybody a different feeling to have somebody that is that talented and that close to you.
I grew up with Pete. We started in 1957 in junior high together, and so he was just a friend from day one. But we never really truly understood how good he was until hindsight. You know, later years you look back and you think, holy Moses, he really was good. But Pete was a wonderful person to work with. He'd get up on stage. He was phenomenal at calling songs. Believe it or not, it's pretty hard to call the right songs to keep people dancing all night long and enjoying themselves. He was phenomenal at that. He had a great voice. But he was a very good friend. We took trips together and so forth when we were younger with my parents and so forth. But I was very close to Pete. We played football together. He was a quarterback, I was a center.
Pete Mervine was a tall, lanky, good-looking guy, had lots of hair, great voice. So you can imagine the 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old girls are just going to swoon over him. Great voice. Besides, Pete Mervine knew how he could sing. He had a wide range. He had a wide vocal range, many octave range in his voice. So he could sing like Frankie Valli of the Four Seasons, you know, Big Girls Don't Cry, and, you know, and all of that sort of thing. Long before the Four Seasons were ever invented, he could sing that very high pitch voice and a cappella and all of that sort of thing. And also sing a full range all the way down into bass. So he was extremely talented in his vocal range, and you can hear it in Twins. You can particularly hear it in Twins because he'll sing that Frankie Valli, you know, Big Girls Don't Cry in Twins, and then in other parts he'll sing at a normal baritone or a tenor voice.
Apparently Pete had been in the band before I joined. And then he wasn't in the band at the point where I was there, first joined up, but then I'd say within 6 months or so we were playing at a party and Pete came up out of the audience and sang a few, and that's where I learned that he had formerly been with the band, and the guys asked him to rejoin, and that was our heyday because Pete was, you know, he had quite an image. He was a football star and good looking, could sing great, and you know, we pretty much took a back seat to Pete for quite a few years there.
In 1962, Pete and Bruce wrote A Love I Had, which would become the band's second single and the one considered to be their best sounding. Once again, the Kingtones had their shot at stardom. But soon after the record's completion, Gil King left the band over a dispute. He was replaced by Bob Major, but local DJs felt the band was doomed without King and gave the record but scant airplay. A Love I Had faded away before it ever hit the charts.
I think when we first started, it was sort of a goal. You know, everybody hopes, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have a hit record? And but it wasn't one that we really, you know, went after day after day after day. We got to write, we got to do this, we got to do that. We were more interested in performing and playing for people.
Well, the big thing was the single record. That was the driving force that set the standard for albums and everything else. But the single was the most important thing. And all the radio stations had their top 40 lists. And every Monday morning, it was a call from the radio station to give you your top 20 selling singles of the week. And that's primarily what we functioned on. As the 78s went out, of course, when the 45s came in, it became even more pronounced.
But the band had a growing following at its live shows to keep it going. Crowds were getting bigger, and despite the premature death of their newest single, the Kingtones were finding themselves more popular than ever. They played nightclubs, festivals, and even rode in Traverse City's Cherry Festival Parade. The show took on an incredible energy which didn't go unnoticed, and the crowds loved them.
Well, there's lots of you know, things that you can remember. Some of the fond memories are when we used to play at the Shamrock Lounge. It used to be in Bridge Street, which is no longer there anymore. It's a parking lot for the Gerald R. Ford Museum. But we used to have lines that would go out the door, go across the bridge to where the post office is, just waiting to get in to see us. Those are very fond memories. We used to have a bicycle, had a little gauge on it. And we would get people up there to ride on this bicycle the length of one song. And it had numbers on it, like 100, 200, 300, up to 1,000. And we had a chart. If you get 1,000, any drink in the house that they could have. If you got the 500, maybe a bag of chips. You know, got 300, you're a wimp, you know, and so forth. And we used to have people get up, and of course we'd have the big macho guys that would get up, and they're going to show their buddies that they can hit 1,000. Well, we'd play a short song. Get up to only 200, you know, and their buddies, of course, would just rip them apart. They get up some little gal, and they would play a real long song, you know, and she'd hit 900 or something. So those are pretty fond memories. I can remember in Traverse City one time at the Cherry Festival, we were playing for a dance up there. Lee Lyons, he was a disc jockey here in town for WMAX, and he often had sideline dances. And he wanted us to, with our new van, to go down the main street and be part of the attraction. Well, we used to be a show band at that time. We did different show tunes. One of them was called Tarzan. So I was dressed up in just little shorts, you know, and I had a goofy hair sticking up in the air. And I had frog fins on. I don't know why I had frog fins on, but I did. And my job was to pull this van. I got a little rope, and I'm pretending that I'm pulling the thing. Well, the rope kept breaking. So Lee Lyons was in the van and said, stop the van, because he's not pulling. I'd have to run back and tie that thing. And it went for like a mile, you know. My feet were bloody when it was done, but Lee Lyons was real happy because he did have a big crowd that night. People saw the van, they saw the name. Two guys were sitting on the roof with their guitars, and it was a nice production, and people came out to the dance afterwards. But I certainly remember that, Mo.
I'd have to say it's been maybe 10 years ago now, and the Marine Corps band was supposed to perform, and it was July 4th, and they got rained out, and so they asked the Kingtones at the last minute to fill in, and we like I said, we were behind the Gerald R. Ford Museum. We had a crowd of, I think they estimated like 15,000 people, and we got up and sang, and it was just, you know, something that'll live on in your memory forever. It was a beautiful night. The setting was just right, you know, and the Grand River in the background even looked beautiful, and you know, it was overwhelming. Then the next week we went to a bar, and we ended up playing in front of like 10 people. You know? So you've had some real highs and some real lows.
When you see a bar fight, and we would do this on purpose, like at Shamrock, and they'd start fighting, and we'd play faster and harder and louder. Well, they start fighting faster and harder and louder, and all of a sudden we slow it right down. All of a sudden they're hitting like girls. Like, it's amazing what music can do. I mean, it could take a crowd, and you could put them in any mood that the music was. Fast, hard, you're slugging fast and hard. Slow it right down to Blueberry Hill, all of a sudden everything's okay again. Sorry I hit ya, die, yada, yada, yada. So it's pretty, that's probably the number one thing that sticks out in my mind, not one single event, but understanding what music can do. It's really a gateway to a lot of avenues.
Our record was released in Detroit, and our cadet records really wanted us to stay around, but it was winter and we had made up our minds that we were going to head for Florida. And so we just up and left in the Kingtones Band. I think I had a little 55 T-Bird that I followed behind. And we didn't really realize that when you get to Florida and you don't have a job that they're not real happy about it. They don't like Northerners coming down there and taking their jobs. And our first real gig was, we were seriously thinking of taking it, was at a place called Captain Joe's. It was a strip club, and he offered us $250 a week for a 5-piece band, 6 nights a week, and we were so desperate we damn near took it. Before we took the job, fortunately Bruce, who's the common sense guy in the band, suggested that we ought to at least try the hottest clubs in the area. And so we went to the first one in Fort Lauderdale at the time, which was Lenny's, and they wouldn't even let us in the door. And we then went to Porky's in Fort Lauderdale, and we just happened to be lucky. Porky had just gotten in a fight with his band, wanted to get rid of him. He said, "Bring that stuff right in here, let me hear ya." And he didn't realize that he actually hit the jackpot with us, because we had been playing at the Coral Gables in East Lansing for several years. And so that year, all the kids coming down to Fort Lauderdale, instead of going to Lenny's, they'd have to go past Porky's to get there, and they'd see our name on the billboard. And so that was the first year that Porky's was actually the hottest spot in Fort Lauderdale. And we were there for maybe, I'd say, about 3 months.
There is a business owner, I won't mention his name, but he's a good friend of the band, and he has a house party twice a year. Once is a pool party in the summer, and once is a Christmas party in the house, and he goes all out. And it's really a special feeling, because first of all, he pays extremely well, and he sets everything up. It's all catered, it's all totally special, and he just makes you feel like you're really, really a part of his event, and it was always a real special thing to play for that.
The single Twins, perhaps the Kingtones' biggest hit, came out in 1963. The song was by Phil Roberts and once again featured Pete Mervine on vocals. Twins made it all the way to number 7 on the local charts, attracting the attention of Cadet Distributing, a promotional firm in Detroit, which signed the band to a record contract. Cadet re-released the single and promoted it heavily in the Midwest. The record looked like a sure thing.
We released Twins in Grand Rapids, and it did extremely well. Cadet from Detroit wanted to try to go with it nationally. The problem is it had a slowdown part in the middle where it fit the part of the story, but they felt that it wouldn't make a good dance tune that way. So they had us re-record it, and I think the second recording was vastly inferior to the first. Had I been and had more say in it, I guess I would have said, no, you have to go with the first one.
We were excited about it, and when they came in and said they wanted us to change it, as far as I was concerned, well, if it gave us a chance to get a national hit, why not change it? The first recording was a much better recording of Twins than the second one, but I think that the second one had the right idea. You can't stop in the middle of a song while people are dancing and they just stand there and look at each other. So they did have the right idea. It's a shame that they didn't have a better recording of it. Had they had a better recording of it, like our first one was, I think that it could have done very well.
I don't know if it's a record company so much as it was, I think Pete wanted to up-tempo it. And he came out with, hey, hey, baby, you know, and they were playing, they knew it was a hit, they thought it was a hit, and they were just exploring avenues to go with the song to figure out what would the people like better, the original or the updated one. And so, actually the original I thought was a lot better, but too much. The second version was too overdone, I thought, but my opinion on it.
The Kingtones were going to make it big. The band opened, backed, and performed with acts like Del Shannon, Bobby V, Bobby Vinton, and the Beach Boys. They played at Coral Gables in Lansing, a club that was remodeled 3 times to accommodate the growing crowds that the band was attracting. The re-release of Twins was climbing the charts, and even the B-side, Have Good Faith, was heralded by the Michigan Record Review as one of the best releases of the year. Then the British invasion struck, and Twins stalled on the Detroit charts at 21 on WKNR. Bands like the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five overshadowed the Kingtones. Twins stopped getting airplay, and the record died.
The British invasion. Boy, I'll tell you, talk about stop dead in your tracks, you know. Holy Moses, our record was climbing. We were number 17 in Detroit. And all of a sudden, bam, zam, if you weren't British or foreign, they stopped playing your records. And even a lot of the well-known artists like Neil Sedaka, Bobby V, they stopped playing their stuff too. So an unknown like us, we didn't have a prayer to get our stuff played.
The British invasion started in the summer, I'll never forget this because I was 18. It started in the summer of 1964. And it started with the Beatles and I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I listened to that song and thought to myself, this is the start of something very large. This is really something very large. However, prior to that point in time, of course, you had the Kingtones and you had the Philly sound, the Philadelphia sound with Phil Spector and the Ronettes and the Shirelles and Bobby Rydell, and you had all of these great sounds coming out of Philadelphia. And you had the Motown sound. You had the Supremes and Little Stevie Wonder and the Temptations and the Four Tops. All right, you have all of this, and then all of a sudden comes the Beatles. And all of a sudden comes the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And everybody's going to watch the Ed Sullivan Show at 8 o'clock on Sunday night to see what the heck are these Beatles. Well, it winds up taking over the nation. It winds up taking over the music. You wind up having on Top 40 radio the top 5 songs being the Beatles. The Beatles are the top 5 songs, or the Dave Clark Five, or any number of people out of England being on the top 5, or maybe the top 10. Where are the Supremes? Where are the Temptations? Where are the Four Tops? They're falling off.
Well, they just kind of wormed their way onto the charts as they different songs and groups caught on, and they were sandwiched in with all the local and the American groups that were working, but it just seemed like their stuff hit the charts and went up pretty fast. So that's why they called it the British invasion, because they started taking over the charts.
When we were 17 with the Beatles 1 through 10, it didn't look real good. And Cadet, who had a lot of clout, but as I recall, they might have even gone out of business as a result of the Beatles. I'm not sure. It seems like I remember something along those lines. But we were able to witness the Beatles invasion firsthand and literally, because at the point where the Beatles entered in Miami, we were playing at Porky's in Fort Lauderdale at the time, and it was something. It was really something. I've never been so scared in my life, and most of it were like most of it was 12-year-old girls, and I was still scared out of my wits.
Discouraged but not out, the Kingtones cut their fourth record, The Girl I Love, in 1965. Cadet promoted the record, and even with all of the excitement of the British invasion, it rose to number 4 on WLAV's local top 40 charts. It was one of the biggest selling records in Grand Rapids, Detroit, Flint, Lansing, and in Toledo, Ohio. The Girl I Love was receiving play on WKNR in Detroit and even WLS out of Chicago. The record couldn't pick up national momentum, though, and it stayed in the Midwest. Cadet gave up hope, and the next Kingtones recording, I Am the One Who Stands Alone, never went to vinyl.
I think when you're a kid, you're more surprised when you do make it big. You know, you're just used to not being anything other than out of the ordinary. I think, if anything, my biggest surprise was when we got jobs at some of the big clubs where I figured we wouldn't have a prayer.
By this time, most of the Kingtones were married and attending college. Lead singer Pete Mervine had married and moved out of West Michigan and was replaced by Dave Roberts. The band continued to play the club scene and packed places like the Old Crow, the Shamrock, and the Alpine Lounge. Members came and went, but the fans stuck with him.
Usually, I would say if people came in like we had to replace somebody, I always looked at it as a trial period. And if they stayed with us at least 2 years, we considered them an official Kingtone, at least I did. If they left before that time, or if the group or Phil in particular said, I don't think he fits our mode of music, we're going to have to let him go, we never really considered him a Kingtone because it was just a trial period.
Phil Roberts, the guitar player, owned a recording studio called Midwestern Sound here in Grand Rapids. And in 1968, I had a band called Band X that recorded there. And we were there numerous times over 68 and 69. Kind of kept in contact with Phil a little bit through the years. I didn't live here at that point. Then when I moved here, there was a point in time where I sat in at a wedding reception with another band that I knew, and one of the guys happened to mention that the Kingtones were looking for a bass player. So I called Phil. He didn't even know that I was in the area, and we kind of hooked up, and I wound up staying with him for 6 years. Well, I was still always called the new guy. Even after 6 years, they still referred to me as the new guy. In fact, they even, on one of my shirts, it said Jay the New Guy. So I never quite got past the new guy status.
In 1969, the band cut its 5th record, the cover of the Buddy Holly classic, It Doesn't Matter Anymore, which earned them a 3-year contract with Atlantic Records, but never got much airplay. Their last attempt, Spicks and Specks, with vocals by Dave Roberts, was released in 1976. Most radio stations took a pass on the record because it wasn't on a major label.
The last song we did was called Spicks and Specks, and the Bee Gees had put that out in Australia, and it was my idea, you know, and I copied the song. It's a heck of a song. I produced it. Out of it, we had sold the studio. We went to another studio. I produced it. It's the cleanest recording we've ever had. I don't know if you heard the song, Where is the Sun? Well, the Bee Gees were like Australia's Beatles, and they were coming over from Australia to England on an ocean liner. Didn't even know they hit in Australia. And they got a cable wire on the ship saying, hey, you guys are stars. So they came, by the time they got to England, they got a really good producer, I can't remember his name, and then the rest is history. So the Bee Gees were a huge influence. That record went nowhere because we couldn't get a radio station to play it because we were getting older, and if we were like 21, we probably would have played it, but at our age, at 30 years of age or whatever, they just said, hey, yeah, we're not interested. So, cleanest, best recording we did, but no audience.
For a lesser band, it might have been the end of the ride, but the Kingtones have endured all the way to a new millennium.
When you're a teenager and you're, and you've got other teenagers going bonkers over your music, it's a pretty heady experience. And I think another answer to the question as to why we're still doing it is perhaps in our minds we're still trying to get back to that experience. It never quite measures up to that, of course.
Well, they enjoy playing music together, and they've had good success. They've had a lot of friends who've really, you know, kept them going, I think, just the support that they've gotten. And if you'd ask Phil, he'd say because he doesn't know how to do anything else, so that could be an answer as well. And Bruce is a real stick-to-it kind of guy. He doesn't want to, I think he's been the one that has kept Phil interested enough to keep the band going. And it's kind of Phil's, I think when and if it does ever end, it's going to be because Phil said so. That's kind of, Bruce is there for the long haul. George, the drummer, he's been there since sometime in the 70s, he says. He doesn't remember exactly when. And Jim, the singer, he's great, and he's very supportive as well. So I think they'll keep going for a while. I'm back with them again now, as a matter of fact. So
there's times when you drag in to work the next morning if we're working overtime or whatever. But I thought we've talked about hanging it up a few times, but it means so much to the people, and entertaining the people in turn gives you a good feeling about yourself, and I think that's what's most important. Is
Primarily, it's the love of it. Musicians and entertainers just love getting up there on stage and having a good time. A lot of us just give up the ghost and say, I can't do this anymore. But like Phil and Bruce, here they are 40 years later, still out there rocking, and I think it's pretty cool that they're up there entertaining people, and people are still enjoying every minute of it. I think a lot of it is also, it's nice to reminisce. And when you look back at the 60s and the 70s, it was a lot different than it is now. A lot more laid back, a lot more mellow. I think people had a lot better time back in those days, and it's kind of nice to revisit. And I think Phil and Bruce are still doing it.
I guess just the track record itself, the length of time that they've been together, the number of people who have stood behind them and supported them through the years, I think is what makes it really special. Because without that, there would be no work. There would be no Kingtones if there weren't people to come hear them. And every place that we played, I would hear people come up and talk about the old days and this and that, and Westgate and here and there and everywhere. And they're just, they have friends all over the place. People come from miles if they hear that they're playing somewhere. So I think that's what's kept them going, is that people don't want them to quit. And like I said about Bruce, Bruce is very stable, and he keeps Phil there, and Phil still loves it enough that he's been doing it all these years. I think that's basically it, the love of it. It's never gone away.
It's 2003. Grunge rock has come and gone. Women musicians are part of the mainstream, and there's a whole new generation of garage rockers playing music, this time without the matching suits. The world has gone digital, and the country has connected in a way Jack Kerouac never could have imagined. WGRD has vacated the White House on the Hill, the circuit has long since become Monroe Mall, and WMAX has turned its frequency over to WGVU. Although they're now considered vintage rock, the band still has the energy and the life it's always had. And in the fall of 2002, the Kingtones performed a reunion concert for WGVU TV. 45 years after the band's birth, original members Bob Major and Mike King rejoined the Kingtones for a one-night engagement.
I got a gal named Bonnie Maroney, ain't much thicker than a stick of macaroni. Ought to see her dance with the new shoes on. Well, rolling through the skin and bone. I love her, she loves me, and oh how happy now we can be, making love underneath the apple tree. Well, I told her papa and I told her mama too.
I'm gonna do. We're gonna get married on a night in June. Making love underneath the silvery moon. I love her and she loves me. Oh, how happy now we can be. Making love underneath the apple tree. Papa and I told her mama too. Listen, let me tell you what I'm gonna do. Gonna get married on a night in June. Making love underneath the silvery moon. I love her and she loves me. Oh, how happy now we can be, making love underneath the apple tree. Making love under, who's that introvert out there? Making love underneath the apple tree. Oh, Mike King, Bob Major. Original bass player and the drummer. I don't care what they say about you guys. You weren't that bad.
I'm sure every artist who's ever performed would tell you that you're nothing without your fans. In our case, we're not really a band that you want to just go and watch. We're a dance band. And without the diehards, and there's a core group of maybe 20 of them, that come in there and really get rolling once the music gets going, we'd be in big trouble. So I guess there's the difference between a night where you go home bored and wondering why you're still doing this, and the nights where you feel like you're in you've done something that's really fun and you're looking forward to the next time.
I don't think there's any way you can thank them other than just let them know that you appreciate them when you see them. When we had this PBS special, the dance party, we called up a lot of the local followers that maybe haven't come out and see us for a year or 2 years and let them know that this was going to take place, because we remembered all the times that they did come out. But yeah, without the fans, we would have been nothing. Even nowadays, we have a little core group of dancers that love to dance, and they know we have a good dance beat, and they'll come out, and when the place is just sitting and people are watching us and doing nothing, this 8, 10, 12 people will get on the floor and they'll start to dance, and pretty soon out will come a couple more, and pretty soon the dance floor is filled up. So we certainly do appreciate them. I hope they know that we do, and I guess I'd just like to say thank you very much. And there's no way you can show that appreciation other than when they come, shake their hand and smile and say, "I'm so glad to see you here."
Well, you know, we've had people there, like which was alluded to earlier, that we hadn't seen, you know, in 10 to 15 years or whatever, or occasionally, you know, the people come out to see us, but not as often anymore because they're, you know, in their 40s, 50s, you know, some of the younger ones, you know, in their 30s, and of course they're still, you know, there's quite a mixed group that was there that night. You know, I was really tickled, you know, although like I said, you know, I was nervous. You know, it's not anything that's ever happened to me in my life. So the other guys they've had a couple different interviews with televisions and news reporters, but you know, it was you know, indescribable, really.
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll fly home every day. And I'll send all my love to you. Well, I'll pretend that I'm kissing the lips I am missing, and hope that my dreams will come true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day, and I'll send all my love to you. All my loving I will send to you. All my loving, darling, I'll be true. Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day, and I'll send all my love to you. All my loving I will send to you. All my loving, darling, I'll be true. All my loving, all my loving, all my loving, I will send to you. Thank you, Father.
Well, let's put it this way. The Beach Boys are America's treasure. To Western Michigan, the Kingtones are. So as we sit here and dance to their music, it's wonderful. It brings us back to an earlier time. But I've been at performances where the Kingtones played. I saw 3 generations of people.
It's great, it's like they're ageless, because, we all look a lot older, and we are a lot older. But the Kingtones, when they start playing, it's like we were back in the 60s, and it's a wonderful thing,
Well, we were a band that, that was the thing that was going on. Young kids were getting into bands. I mean, it was something that was the thing to do, and I think we had a good chemistry together. We played well together and genuinely liked each other. We were all good friends. When I see these guys playing, and Pete passing on and Gil passing on, it's like, holy cow! I'm still the old man of the group. It's like it makes you really wonder. It was great seeing these guys tonight. It really was.
Now hear me, all old people, and listen while I tell the story of my romance and the wishing well. I prayed to all of heaven to send down from above a pretty little angel, a girl for me to love. Hit it, Phil Roberts! There's a place where a man will go to find a girl to love him so. Down the lonely road to the wishing well. Through a nickel I heard a splash. Before me was a splash. There she was, little girl of my dream. This is the well in the heavens above. We are sent to an angel to love. Be kind to her, love her till you die. I was startled, what a surprise. A miracle happened before my eyes. Just as sudden as she appeared, before my eyes she disappeared. I knew it was good to be true. Phil Roberts, I know. for my eyes. When I got home, I was told the people who moved next door. There she was, the little girl at the wishing well. Yeah, the girl of my dreams. Yeah, the girl I adore. Yeah, she moved right next door. Right next door. There you go, baby, me, oh my, where you left me here so I could sit and cry. Well, golly gee, what have you done to me? Oh well, I guess it doesn't matter more. Do you remember, baby, last September, how you held me tight each and every night? Well, whoops a daisy, how you drove me crazy, but I guess it doesn't matter anymore. There is no use in me crying. I've done everything and now I'm sick of trying. I've thrown away my nights, waste all my days over. Well, you go your way, I'll go mine. Down forever till the end of time. I'll find somebody new, and baby, we'll say we're through, and you won't matter anymore. There's no use in me crying. I've done everything, and now I'm sick of trying. I've thrown away my night, waste all my days over. But you go your way and I'll go mine. Done forever till the end of time. I'll find somebody new, and baby, we'll say we're through, and you won't matter anymore. You won't matter anymore. You won't matter anymore. You won't matter anymore.
And as the Kingtones carry on with their act, we can only look back on an incredible run of amazing music and again say, thanks for the ride.
On my head, the sun in my life, it is dead, it is dead. Where are the lights that would play on my street? And where are the friends I could meet, I could meet? Where are the girls I left far behind? The specks and the specks of the girls of my mind. Here's a story of the love I had with a girl who made me feel sad.
The Kingtones. Pete Ravine was their singer, the lead singer, and the guys were so great, and all during the 60s, every dance we had at the Civic Auditorium. In fact, they used to back up guys like Bobby V and Tommy Rowe and these other guys, the Kingtones. Here they are with Twins.